Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was a sunny afternoon in the city center. The streets were bustling, cars honking their horns, and passers-by crowded the sidewalks. Sergeant Davis, a zealous but often impulsive police officer, patrolled his area, always on the lookout for suspicious behavior. As he crossed the main avenue, he noticed an elderly man, wearing an elegant but slightly wrinkled coat, crossing the street with a slow but sure step. For Davis, this simple delay at a pedestrian light was suspicious. He signaled the man to stop. "Sir, you can't just cross like that," Davis said, his voice firm and authoritative. The man looked up calmly. His features, marked by age and wisdom, betrayed no fear or agitation. But Davis, determined to demonstrate his authority, persisted. "You have to come with me, you're not following the rules." Reluctantly, the man complied. On the sidewalk, Davis began questioning him in a reproachful tone, raising his voice and pointing his accusing fingers. Passers-by turned to observe the scene, a respectful but silent old man being humiliated by an impatient policeman. The older man, however, showed no signs of anger. He waited patiently, almost as if he knew something Davis didn't. What the policeman didn't know was that the man he was humiliating at that moment was none other than Justice Marcus Hamilton, an influential member of the United States Supreme Court, a man whose name commanded respect and obedience in the corridors of power, and whose wisdom and stature were legendary. Sergeant Davis was about to discover, in the most humiliating way for him, that appearances are often deceptive, and that every act of arrogance can have unintended consequences. Sergeant Davis couldn't believe what had just happened. After humiliating the elderly man in front of several passers-by, he felt proud of himself, certain that he had upheld the law. Yet, something in the man's calm, collected gaze unnerved him. "You'd better remind me the next time you want to enforce the law," the man said in a deep but gentle voice. Davis frowned, irritated by the condescending tone. "Who are you to talk to me like that?" he said angrily. The man smiled slightly and replied simply, "I am a Supreme Court judge." Davis burst out laughing, thinking it was a bad joke. But the passers-by, now intrigued, murmured among themselves, some casting admiring glances at the elderly man. "You're making fun of me," Davis shouted, his face red with anger. Judge Hamilton remained impassive and said calmly, "I assure you, I'm not joking. And believe me, what you just did will not go without consequences." At that moment, Davis felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had just publicly humiliated a man whose power and influence far exceeded anything he could have imagined. And what seemed like a simple incident would quickly turn into a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. The judge resumed his walk, slowly, without haste, leaving Davis frozen, ashamed and seized by internal panic. The next morning, Sergeant Davis arrived at the police station feeling uneasy. The incident with the elderly man, Judge Hamilton, was constantly replaying in his mind. Every detail, every glance he received from passers-by, was making him increasingly nervous. No sooner had he passed through the doors of the police station than Captain Reynolds called him into his office. "Davis, sit down," the captain said gravely. The sergeant's heart was pounding. He had a bad feeling about this. "Did you hear about yesterday's incident with the old man on Fifth Avenue?" Reynolds asked calmly. Davis swallowed, unable to meet the captain's gaze. Yes, well, it was just a normal situation," he tried to justify himself. "Normal?" Reynolds repeated, frowning. "Normal, humiliating a senior citizen in front of everyone, for no good reason? You know who that man was, don't you?" The sergeant felt his stomach clench. He shook his head, unable to speak. "That was Judge Marcus Hamilton, a member of the Supreme Court," the captain continued. "And he's already filed a formal complaint against you." Davis paled. The gravity of the situation hit him like a bolt from the blue. "This could lead to severe sanctions, even suspension," Reynolds added. "You have no idea the repercussions if this matter became public." The sergeant sat down heavily, shame and fear mingling in his mind. He realized then that simple arrogance and overzealousness had unleashed a storm that threatened to ruin his career. Meanwhile, in court, Judge Hamilton calmly prepared his complaint carefully. Every word he wrote was precise, measured, and carried with it the echo of justice. He knew that this was not just a matter of personal respect, but a necessary lesson to show that no act of humiliation was tolerable, even for a police officer. Davis didn't know it yet, but his life had changed. The game wasn't over, and Judge Hamilton was ready to make him pay the price for arrogance. Sergeant Davis hadn't slept a wink all night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Judge Hamilton's calm, stern face again. Just remembering his precise words and serious tone made him nervous. In the morning, the phone at the police station began ringing non-stop. Captain Reynolds entered the room and announced, "Davis, there have been formal complaints filed. Internal Affairs will open an investigation into your behavior. And I'm warning you, Judge Hamilton is personally overseeing this matter." The sergeant felt his heart race. He'd already considered fines or warnings, but a formal investigation meant his career was in jeopardy. Soon after, the first rumors began circulating in the local media. Witnesses had taken photos and filmed the incident. The scene of the police officer humiliating an elegant and dignified elderly man quickly spread on social media. Public anger began to mount. "This is a scandal," Davis muttered, scanning the online messages. "How can a police officer act like this? Humiliating an elderly man? Unthinkable." He quickly realized that the case had gone beyond the confines of the police station. His superiors now regarded him with suspicion, colleagues whispered behind his back, and Judge Hamilton's lawyers were meticulously preparing their strategy. It was at this precise moment that Davis received a call from Captain Reynolds. "You've been summoned to Internal Affairs this afternoon. Prepare to explain everything. And Davis, think carefully about your answers. The slightest inconsistency could cost you dearly." The sergeant felt panic rising. He realized that the humiliation he had inflicted on Judge Hamilton was only the beginning of his own humiliation. And as he left the station, he knew his professional life would never be the same again. Meanwhile, Judge Hamilton, in the calm of his office, knew exactly how much leverage to bring to bear to remind Davis that arrogance came at a price. The officer's every move would now be watched, and every mistake would be magnified. Afternoon arrived, and Sergeant Davis entered the Internal Affairs room with a knot in his stomach. The white walls, harsh lights, and heavy silence accentuated his nervousness. 3 officers were waiting for him, files in hand, their gazes scrutinizing the officer's every move. "Sit down, Sergeant Davis," one of the officers said in a cold, professional tone. "We're going to review the Fifth Avenue incident. You have the right to explain yourself." Davis took a deep breath and tried to gather his thoughts. I just thought I was upholding the law," he began awkwardly. "Enforcing the law by humiliating an elderly citizen in front of everyone," another officer interrupted. "Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Davis felt his hands grow sweaty. He stammered, unable to find the right words. Each sentence seemed to make his situation worse. "Judge Marcus Hamilton personally filed a complaint," the officer continued. "He accepts no excuses, and he insisted that this investigation be conducted thoroughly." At that moment, one of the officers placed a photo on the table. The video taken by a passerby showed Davis pointing at the judge, shouting, and humiliating him in front of the crowd. The evidence was clear, unequivocal, undeniable. "You see, Sergeant Davis," the senior officer said calmly, "this is not just a simple misunderstanding. Your behavior has been unprofessional and unacceptable." Davis felt his cheeks flush. He'd thought it would just be a warning, perhaps a wake-up call. But the reality was much harsher. His career, his reputation, and his credibility were now at stake. "You will be temporarily suspended," the lead officer announced. "And please know that Judge Hamilton is personally monitoring every step of this case. Every misstep you take could be fatal to your future." Davis left the courtroom with a heavy heart and a head full of regret. He knew he had just crossed a point of no return. The humiliation he had inflicted on the judge was now about to backfire on him, and he would have to learn the hard way that arrogance and recklessness always come at a price. The next day, Davis received the official notification: he was suspended without pay, pending the conclusion of the investigation. The news spread quickly through the police station. Colleagues who once greeted him with respect now avoided him, whispering behind his back. Alone in his small apartment, Davis sat heavily on his couch. The video of the incident played over and over in his mind. Every gesture, every word he had spoken now seemed grotesque and humiliating. "How could I have been so stupid?" he muttered to himself. He thought back on his career, the years spent patrolling the streets, enforcing the law, and now it all seemed threatened by a simple error in judgment. Judge Hamilton, calm and implacable, had become the symbol of his imminent downfall. The local press began publishing detailed articles about the incident, with headlines such as "Police Officer Humiliating Elderly Citizen," an example of misplaced zeal. Social media went into overdrive, and Davis unwittingly became the target of harsh criticism. "I have to find a way to redeem myself," he thought. "But how do I redeem myself from public humiliation in front of a man like Judge Hamilton?" Meanwhile, Judge Hamilton left nothing to chance. He knew that suspension alone would not be enough to teach Davis his lesson. The officer's every move was being watched, every action weighed. The man who had been humiliated had not forgotten, and he intended to ensure that justice was served, in an exemplary but fair manner. Davis realized then that his professional life would never be the same again. The suspension was only the beginning of what he would have to face, not only the disciplinary proceedings, but also his own conscience, which now tormented him every moment. Davis's suspension lasted a few days, but each moment away from the station seemed like an eternity. The sergeant, consumed by guilt and fear, decided he had to do something to repair, or at least mitigate, the damage he had caused. He made an appointment to meet with Judge Hamilton, hoping that a sincere apology might ease the situation. On the day of the meeting, he arrived early, dressed in his impeccable uniform, his heart pounding. "Good morning, Your Honor," he began, his voice trembling. I want to apologize for my behavior. I should never have." But before he could finish, Judge Hamilton calmly raised his hand. "Sergeant Davis," he said calmly, "I understand that you're trying to right your wrongs. But apologies alone aren't always enough. Accountability involves more than words." Davis felt his hope fade. He had imagined that a simple apology might soften the shockwaves of the incident. But the judge, with his natural calm and authority, left no room for shortcuts. "I am willing to listen to what you propose to repair the harm you have caused," Hamilton continued. "But know that any gesture must be thoughtful and sincere." Davis, embarrassed and ill-prepared, stammered out a few confused ideas. Organize a community service? Participate in workshops on respect and ethics? But all of this seemed trivial compared to the scale of the public humiliation. Judge Hamilton nodded slowly, weighing each word. "This isn't just for me, Sergeant. It's to show that authority must always be exercised with respect and discernment. You must learn this before you can return to duty." Davis left the meeting feeling a mixture of humiliation and determination. He understood that to regain even a modicum of credibility, he would have to transform himself not only as a police officer, but also as a person aware of his limitations and responsibilities. After his meeting with Justice Hamilton, Davis knew he had to act. But it wasn't just about apologizing, he had to demonstrate, through his actions, that he had learned his lesson. The sergeant began by participating in community programs organized by the police station. He spent hours helping elderly people cross streets, leading workshops on respect for authority and citizens, and listening to the stories of neighborhood residents. Each interaction reminded him of his past mistake and the need for humility. However, the road to redemption was far from easy. Some colleagues continued to criticize him, constantly recalling the incident with Judge Hamilton. The media, for their part, regularly published articles about his effort to redeem himself, some skeptical, others sarcastic. One afternoon, while leading a group of young people in a prevention workshop, Davis received an unexpected call. "Sergeant Davis?" This is Judge Hamilton. I wish to meet with you again. Davis's heart raced. Was this another accusation? Or a chance to show he'd truly changed? During the meeting, the judge reviewed Davis's notes and reports on his efforts. I see you've begun to understand what it means to exercise authority with respect, Hamilton said measuredly. Your actions show a willingness to change, but there's still a long way to go. Davis felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't complete approval, but it was a sign. He could still regain his dignity and rebuild his career, provided he remained sincere and determined. The sergeant left the meeting with a mixture of relief and determination. He understood that redemption was not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. And for the first time since the incident, he felt he had a chance to right his wrongs. A few weeks into his redemption efforts, Davis was immersed in his community routine when an unexpected situation arose. An altercation broke out in a nearby neighborhood. A confused and lost elderly man had been accosted by some local youths. The neighbors called the police. Davis was dispatched to the scene. His heart was beating fast, but this time he forced himself to remain calm. He knew every gesture would count and that his behavior would be scrutinized, not only by his superiors, but also by Judge Hamilton, who continued to monitor his actions from a distance. Upon arrival, Davis noticed that the elderly man was shaking and appeared panicked. The young men were shouting and gesticulating, ready to escalate. The sergeant took a deep breath and addressed them firmly but not aggressively. Calm down. Everyone needs to calm down now. I'm here to help you. For the first time, Davis managed to manage a tense situation without resorting to intimidation or humiliation. He guided the older man aside, spoke to the younger men with patience and respect, and successfully diffused the conflict. The neighbors and colleagues present were impressed by his composure and restored dignity. Later, as he recorded the incident in the official report, Davis felt a faint smile. He had just proven to himself and to others that he could apply the lessons learned. Judge Hamilton, aware of the incident, made a mental note of the sergeant's progress. Davis understood that it was not an easy path. Each new situation would be a test of his patience and respect for others. But he now knew that he could face these challenges with integrity, even if the memory of his past mistake would remain etched in his mind forever. A few months later, a public event was held to celebrate the work of law enforcement in the community. Davis was invited, still under discreet surveillance, and knew his presence would be closely observed. Judge Hamilton, sitting among the honored guests, never missed an opportunity to note Davis's behavior. The respected older man wanted to make sure the sergeant had truly learned the lesson: authority must be exercised with dignity and humility. During the ceremony, a minor incident occurred. An excited and reckless young man accidentally bumped into a crying child. The surrounding police officers began to react quickly, but Davis intervened first. Instead of shouting or pointing, he calmly walked over to the young man and spoke to him patiently. Hey, calm down. What you did wasn't right, but I want you to understand the situation. Show me you can fix your mistake. The young man, surprised by Davis's respectful but firm manner, immediately apologized and helped the child. The spectators applauded quietly, impressed by the sergeant's control and maturity. Judge Hamilton watched silently, a faint smile on his lips. He knew Davis had changed. He no longer acted out of impulse or arrogance, but out of understanding and responsibility. The man who had been humiliated by Davis months earlier now saw the complete transformation of a police officer willing to own up to his mistakes and act with integrity. At the end of the ceremony, Hamilton made an unexpected gesture. He approached Davis and said calmly but gravely, "You've learned a lot, Sergeant. Never forget that respect and humility are the true marks of a leader." Davis felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since the incident, he felt as if his redemption was real and that the judge had given him his trust, even partially. A few weeks after the public ceremony, the internal investigation into Davis concluded. Superiors and internal affairs officials recognized the sergeant's continued efforts, his participation in community programs, his increased patience in interventions, and his sincere desire to correct his mistakes. Captain Reynolds summoned Davis into his office. "Sergeant," he said, "your suspension is lifted. We've reviewed your progress, and it's clear you've learned your mistakes. You'll return to duty tomorrow. Davis felt a surge of relief, but also gratitude and respect for how far he had come. He knew that his redemption was not just for his career, but more importantly for his conscience and those he had affected. The next day, back in his uniform, he met his colleagues. Some still looked at him skeptically, but most recognized the change. Davis focused on his work, guided by the lessons he had learned: patience, respect, and humility. A few days later, he received an unexpected message from Judge Hamilton. "Sergeant Davis, keep up the good work. You've shown that even after a serious mistake, the will to change can transform a man." These words resonated deeply within him. Davis understood that authority was not just a power to be exercised, but a responsibility to be honored. The past humiliation was no longer a burden, but a lesson that had shaped the man he had become. Walking the streets he knew so well, the sergeant smiled inwardly. He had not only regained his career, but also found a newfound dignity and respect, both for himself and for others. And in a quiet corner of his mind, Judge Hamilton's calm face remained a constant reminder: true authority is measured by how one treats others.